Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of the more deadly undead, the dreaded Bodak. You can find them in the 5th edition on page 127 of Volo's Guide to Monsters, where they're listed as a challenge rating 6 undead that radiates necrotic damage, yet is oddly not immune to necrotic damage itself. It is an infamous gaze attack that is easily one of the most formidable in the game, but more on that later in the video. The Bodak first appears in the module The Lost Caverns of Sojanth, published in 1982 and later appeared in the 1st edition Monster Manual 2 in 1983. The 2nd edition detailed them a bit more in the Planescape setting, and by 3rd edition it was in the main Monster Manual and got its own article in Dragon Magazine number 307 in May 2003. Oh hey, look at that. The Red Priestess Melisandre. A George R.R. Martin interview and King's Landing adventure. See that, Game of Thrones fans? Dungeons & Dragons has been rocking Westeros for quite some time. I wonder if there could even be a TV series if it was not for D&D. Anyway, this article introduces the idea of undead templates. The Bodak is a good example of how this works, and there is a horrendous Hydra Bodak in this article that's every bit as nasty as it sounds. So, what is a Bodak exactly? How do these things come about? I quite like the way that 5th edition expanded the lore of the Bodaks with some more details on the cult of Orcus and the origin story of the first Bodaks, plus the very idea that there are these 7 super Bodaks roaming around, presumably deep in the abyss. It's pretty cool. The original 7 Bodaks are called the Hierophants of Annihilation, and it is written that they are very powerful beings, as mighty as Balors. And a Balor is a challenge rating 19 monster, so I do think that the Bodak is best seen as an undead template, a horrific transformation that damns a being to a fate worse than death. First and foremost, the Bodaks were created by Orcus as both another form of virulent undeath, so it spreads, and as a means to infiltrate and gather information of the multiverse. Orcus can see through the eyes and speak through the mouth of any Bodak on the on any plane of existence. He can hear and see what they hear and see. He can take over their physical actions, using them as puppets. The Hierophants of Annihilation have not been detailed anywhere as far as I know. So what they are exactly is completely open for your own interpretation. And here's the cool thing about creating Bodaks as a template applied over top of another base monster type. You can actually create Bodak Balors. The only restriction on the template is that the base creature needs to have 5 hit dice or more, so it won't be a peasant, but it will certainly work on a cult fanatic. They have 68 plus 6 hit points, and Balor have 21 d12 plus 126 hit points, so ridiculously overqualified. The base creature must be corporeal, having a solid form. It can't be an ooze, a construct, a plant, or any form of undead. So, sorry, no Bodak, Balor, vampire liches, folks, thankfully. Next, you simply change a few stats. Reduce its base movement speed by 10 feet per round to a minimum of 10 feet, and any other movement types are unchanged. So, in the example of the Balor that I'm going to be using here, we have a speed of 30 feet, but it can still fly at 80 feet per round. The base creature has its armor class increase a couple of points, so the Balor, already well protected, would increase just a little bit, say AC 20. A cultist fanatic might gain 5 AC though, as the transformation is a big boost for a squishy humanoid. The hit dice type also increases to D12s. This doesn't change the hit points for a Balor at all, but obviously for a cultist it would be quite a boost. Nor do the purely physical attacks of the Balor improve. In fact, it keeps all of its regular abilities and simply adds new special powers, resistances and vulnerabilities from the Bodak. So it's immune to fire, lightning and poison, can't be charmed, frightened or poisoned. Its resistance to cold, necrotic, bludgeoning, piercing or slashing weapons from non-magical weapons. It's all pretty uber. It has the 30-foot aura of annihilation and the death gaze. It's got a 10-foot fire aura. It explodes when it's destroyed. Has advantage on all saving throws against spells and magical effects. All of its melee attacks count as magical weapons. It can attack with a withering gaze. It can teleport, but when in sunlight it takes 5 points of damage per round of exposure and will have disadvantage on all attacks and ability checks. What a pity. So, a formidable monster. I can imagine that's going to push the challenge rating up into the mid-20s at least, which sounds about right if you're going toe-to-toe with a high-level servant of Orcus, such as the Hierophants of Annihilation. The original 7 Hierophants were not only fearsome servants of death, they also spread the Bodak curse to their victims, so the original description of what causes the condition is still correct. A Bodak is a mortal who was killed by exposure to utter evil, exposure to the nihilistic will of Orcus through his minions. The Hierophants have free will. They went into this knowing the will of their master and being totally fine with it. Most cultists, fanatics of Orcus, who are instructed how to perform the rituals that transform them into the undead Bodaks, do not have free will once it's over. Their minds are devastated by this curse just as much as any innocent victim of the Hierophants are almost wiped of all sense of self and any other emotion, because the transformation causes them to die from fear, terror. They tear out their own heart. It's unclear if they do this after they die and realize there's no end to the terror they feel, or they do this at the culmination of making direct contact with the mind of Orcus, and his first command is that they tear out their own heart. The cultist fanatics will carve the symbol of Orcus into their chest right above the heart prior to this happening, and interestingly, the grey-fleshed, hairless and gaunt body of a Bodak will always have the symbol on their flesh, and they will have always will have removed their heart, or I suspect the original Hierophants take an obsessive pleasure in tearing the hearts out of their victims, and this has become a part of the curse itself. A Bodak is chaotic evil. It loathes the living and will murder any non-fiend, any non-undead, non-cultist of Orcus that it encounters. They are difficult for even something like a lich necromancer to control, because they're just murderous, unless they're kept isolated and contained until the time has come to let them off the leash, so to speak. Bodaks are not mindless though, even though their faces may be nearly featureless. The constant emotion of raw terror that they experience at all times is evident on their face. The aura they project out of their eye sockets is raw terror. It is so supernaturally powerful that it can completely drain the will to live from a creature in mere moments. Only beings who are immune to or incapable of experiencing fear are safe from the effect. Even so, the Bodak can choose to radiate an aura of necrotic energy that will wither plants, snuff out the life of tiny animals, and cause all natural life, animal life, to get away from them as fast as they can. And of course, standing in their presence as a humanoid is very dangerous. In fact, you can tell a Bodak or something very bad is nearby just from the reaction of horses, dogs, cats, and birds, who will become very agitated and will want to leave the area. The horror of the curse of the Bodak, though, is that they're not mindless puppets of Orcus. He enjoys the fact that their souls are trapped in their lifeless body, in the cold flesh, and sometimes they remember parts of who or what they were. Such moments are always paralyzing for the Bodak, as a potent memory is triggered by events around them. Perhaps they were a cleric in life, and they witness a cleric laying on healing hands on a comrade. For a moment they remember they were a cleric. Perhaps they react to what used to be their holy symbol of a god that they worshipped. In these brief moments, they will make no physical attacks or movements for a single round and be at a disadvantage for all ability checks and attacks. This is optional though. They don't actually put that in the rules for 5th edition, but it's part of what the Bodaks were in older editions, and I think it's a relatively good one. There's usually like a 5% chance that happens if you want to be statistical about it, but I'd just play it by ear. The terror that they experience swamps that pretty quickly. They've got a shattered, insane mind, and it pretty much resumes their aggressions immediately after. There is another purpose to these vague recollections. Orcus actually enjoys giving the Bodak just enough memory to seek out where it came from, its friends, family, loved ones, but not enough memory to remember who they are. So usually the Bodak will seek out and brutally murder everyone it knew or loved in life, with Orcus lurking behind its empty eyes, enjoying the view. Bodaks can speak Abyssal, a language that sounds like barking and growling dogs, claws scratching rusty metal, hissing meat on a hot grill, and the choking gurgle of a torn-out throat. They also speak whatever mother tongue they knew in life, but rarely do so, and they do sound totally insane, even then, barely intelligible, unless Orcus is speaking through them, which is a terrifying sound in and of itself. They sound more, they tend to move through as much darkness as they can. They can see perfectly well in it, and the touch of sunlight burns them. So if they're stuck out in the open, they'll dig a hole and bury themselves in the ground until the nighttime. Otherwise, they stick to ruins, sewers, caves, caverns, and tunnels, or dense dark jungles. Their death gaze forces anyone within 30 feet who can see the Bodak's black, vacant eyes to make a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or take 3d10 psychic damage. Their eyes aren't always black. Sometimes they're like a milky white rotten, pus-filled orbs. If the opponent fails the save by 5 or more, he or she falls down almostly dead on the spot, unless he or she is basically immune to being frightened. The effect can be avoided by shielding one's eyes, but of course this grants disadvantage on any attempt to attack the Bodak, which they certainly capitalise on. So they are difficult to fight. They are quite capable of sneaking around behind cover, peeking around the side of rocks and trees, getting up close to victims and avoiding putting themselves in danger of missile attacks and ranged spells. Aura of Annihilation is a toggle feature that can be switched on or off as a bonus action, though there's no reason for it not to be on by default, basically, nor any reason that I can see that turn it off, unless they're commanded to by some greater undead, because they're around minions such as the cultists of fanatics of Orcus that it may possibly work with. So it would switch off that aura if it's around its so-called allies. When it's on, any creature aside from fiends and other undead that's within 30 feet of the Bodak, when they end their turn, take 5 hit points of necrotic damage from it. In other words, just being around the Bodak is going to be painful. Both of these effects take place on the opponent's turn, not on the Bodak, so the Bodak is constantly doing damage, even when it's not taking any action. On its own turn, it has the Withering Gaze, a ranged ability that does 4d10 necrotic damage on a failed DC 13 Constitution save, and half of that on a success. Quite a bit more than its unarmed attack, which only does 1d4 plus 2 bludgeoning damage plus 2d8 necrotic if it's a humanoid. Really, the only reason for the Bodak to use its fists is when it can't see its opponents, or if they're immune to fear. Of course, as mentioned, the Bodak curse is not limited to just humanoids. There are Bodak centaurs, Bodak minotaurs, Bodak mind flayers, Bodak ropers, Bodak hunter sharks, Bodak phase spiders, Bodak tigers. Undead horrors are a plague on the living world, and Orcus will never stop trying to kill everything and control everything else. I recommend applying unusual templates to base monsters and throwing some big surprises at your players whenever you can. That's about it for me for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I'll be back again soon with more hideous creatures from Dungeons & Dragons. Hopefully a few nice ones as well.